I'm speaking today with Priya Royal, the managing attorney and founder of Royal Law Firm. Her legal work centers on cross border tax and estate matters that involve multinational families and closely held enterprises. But beyond legal implementation, Priya develops governance frameworks and educational tools through Clexa Consulting and Clexa Publishing, supporting families, advisors, and institutions navigating complexity at scale. She's also the co-author of Aligned, a governance framework for modern families. And so I want to allow Priya the moment to introduce herself and tell us just a little bit about her. Welcome, Priya.
Thank you, Ed, for that wonderful introduction. I don't think I could do better myself, but I would just add that the American Heart Association is a personal passion, as well as it has been very instrumental in helping many of my clients make very good philanthropic decisions over the years. And I celebrate 20 years of practice this year, so it is a nice milestone. And I am happy to share some perspective on how governance really weaves more into planning than the technicality, because the technicality is critically important, but the framework that really holds all of it together and comes in has to bring in the human part. So I would say that my career and my advisory work has leaned more on governance and making it precise through the technical um, cadence that I've developed or I've been blessed to have developed over the years through both my credentials and my experience and working with lovely families and organizations who have taught me more than I could have ever provided. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
We thank you for being here. So let's get into it. In a recent Forbes article, you said that most modern philanthropy, especially in the advisory sector, is focused on vehicles and tax efficiency. And you make the point that planning becomes, or when planning becomes primarily about control and optimization, purpose risks being lost to process. Can you tell me for a few minutes, speak to that about purpose being lost to process?
Absolutely. I think this goes back to the very reason that I define myself as a governance attorney who happens to have a cross-border tax background, which is that the traditional way that advisors are involved, be they attorneys, financial advisors, wealth advisors, accountants, is often in a particular aspect of wealth management or creating legacy. And often we hear of questionnaires, and the questionnaires go into sort of making a lot of assumptions about the client. What do you want to do with your wealth? Do you have charitable intent? Do you have philanthropy? And then all of the education is focused on for tax efficiency, we can create charitable remainder trusts, we can have various types of vehicles, we can do private foundations. At the end of the day, the truth is the correct question for the client is to find out who they are and what they already do that might actually be philanthropy. So one of the things that I focused on in McKinsey was McKinsey Scott in the Forbes article, because her giving away billions of dollars with carefully vetted charities that she vetted through a very privately, founded group. Spoke to most of the community as being a shock to the system because there was no complex planning, there was no charitable structures, there wasn't planned giving as such, at least from the external perspective. And I would say that really actually goes to what philanthropy has been and what charity has been at the crux of our Western and Eastern cultures altogether. As somebody from originally from the other side of the world, in the Eastern culture, Hinduism has a concept of artha. You effectively have living life with purpose, and giving is not an act of giving away. If you look at philanthropy as filling the bucket of what fulfills your life, that becomes more of a legacy planning and purpose and what you want. What is the message you want to give your family, your community, the world at large, rather than how many dollars and cents it's going to save today, because that will naturally weave into that purpose. Same thing is there in Western philosophy as well, the concept of giving, but the culture and the very essence of what it means to each individual is not necessarily framed around the technical part is not put into the framework of what it means to the person, rather what it means to the person is framed around the technical part, if that makes sense. And that's sort of what I was getting at with the conversation is always on tax efficiency and complex giving structures. The question is, why do they want to give and do they even want to give at all? Or is it that they live a life with purpose that could actually be philanthropically more carefully designed to have greater impact? And it just so happens because of where they are situated, what their assets are, how they're distributed, there are technical devices that are effective. You flip the
That's
question.
interesting. Those are interesting points that you make because I think that most clients show up to their wealth advisors, their tax planners, their attorneys to help them deal with their wealth and their tax issues after all. And you're speaking to them about ethical issues and values and legacy planning, aren't you?
Absolutely. And that's been a bit of a constraint in the practice of law because the good thing about law is that it is supposed to provide advocacy for the client and uh, I would say it is sort of lower risk structures that ultimately meet the client's goals. But because of restrictions by jurisdiction, by scope of work, by practice areas, and what can and cannot be done, and conflict of interest rules, it is impossible for a legal professional within a law firm structure to be able to really understand the person you're working with. So you're always waiting for the client to bring you assumptions about where they think they should land. And I mean, it's like, not to bring AI into the conversation, but this is true. The reason you know that this is a back-ended way of doing it is that the clients are now going to chat GPT to come up with what the question is they should ask their advisor. Whereas if the advisor is speaking to them as a complete person with their values and ethics, they would not need to ask ChatGPT to translate the question that they need to ask their advisor. So what we're getting at is that you really need a governance structure and you need advisors, and especially in situations where you have advisors within the philanthropic sector, like American Heart Association, you are able to get to the core of what the client actually wants and then back into the technical sector. I'm known as a cross-border tax attorney. The client comes to me and has a cross-border tax question. They're not thinking about the fact that I could actually design an entire structure, considering that their passion is, and this is based on one of the actual stories, is that a spouse suddenly passed away from a heart attack. This individual was already very inclined to be in the innovation industry and had done various things. I never actually spoke about doing anything philanthropically to further um, charity in health care specifically because that wasn't the industry they were in. But learning the person's life story, you can sort of design an infrastructure by which their existing business and existing innovation can actually fund sources that they actually cared about, which was the fact that their spouse passed away from a heart attack, and it wasn't that they had built the latest technology for spaceships. So you can get to that divide, but that is every advisor. The client walks in assuming that the advisor can only answer the questions that are in what they provide as a product or a service. So, and then the advisor only follows up and asks the questions or deals with the range that they can and what they can provide. It's not it's not malpractice, it's not incompetence on anybody's part. It's just it is wholly inefficient to have a philosophical conversation with every single person, but in reality for philanthropic planning that's what you need.
Well, it's interesting. So, you were telling me at one point about a method that you've developed to help connect your clients' values into their planning process. And I'd just like to dig a little bit deeper and learn more about that method, how you help the client identify their values, for example. You say it's inefficient to do so, yet you seem to have to do that to do a job for your client, at least in your practice.
So what the one of the things that we did in my practice is, as as you mentioned, we have Plexa Consulting, and over the years we've sort of realized that to make it even more accessible to a client who may not be quite ready for specifically legal services, we offer it through the consulting arm, and that way they understand that this is much broader than a legal instrument or a legal solution. And with that, I'll say the book aligned a governance framework for modern families goes through this process. The framework is structure, strategy, and innovation. And it is done in collaboration with Jeremy Royal, who has over 25 years of expertise in governance and process management and organizational communication. The key things that hold families together across the generations. This is where disruption happens between generations, between family members, between cultures, everything else. And then on the other co-author is Dr. Lakshmi Prakash, where she has nearly 50 years of experience in science and technology and stewardship in those industries with leadership things. So they bringing those together with my background in cross-border tax and planning and wealth, asset protection design and wealth planning. What that does is that structure, you realize very quickly if a lawyer starts developing structure for a client, it is already misplaced. The lawyer's input is essential to develop structure. But when I say structure, I'm not talking about a CRUT or a dynastic trust or anything like that. When I say structure, I'm talking about the governing principles for the family. A lot of times you would hear, oh, this is a governance blueprint. That's also a little bit of a misnomer because it's not like an operating agreement or just a list of rules. It's about what actually happens. And that's where the person with organizational communication expertise comes in, which is that the blueprint and the governance framework may say that the patriarch in the family will make a decision about X or Y. At the end of the day, there may be a disconnect with a nephew who's actually handling the assets of that particular line. But how do you resolve that conflict without it being somebody skimming from the top or things being out on a line that wasn't even aligned with the rest of the family's interests? And that requires a structured governance framework that goes through conflict resolution. What are the various values and cultural discrepancies between the organization, which in a case it's a family, but if we are closely at businesses, those are families. Philanthropic ideals may differ between family members. What one considers to be, one may consider cash to be philanthropy, one may consider act to be philanthropy. And how do you bring those together? They're going to be misaligned on what ultimately becomes the instrument that they inherit or they put forward. Either one, right? That strategy is what comes after the basic framework is set. This is the box within which we must operate. These are the constraints. These are the issues. These are the places where we see that folks may not agree, or there are geopolitical issues coming into play that is going to threaten whether certain initiatives can expand or not, and all of that. And then you have strategy, and that is predominantly my lane, and it's what most expert advisors' lanes are, which is developing how do we ensure that that structure is feasible, viable, and sustainable. What do each of the participants in it now and in the future think about control? What do they think about flexibility with assets? What do they think about being directly involved versus indirectly involved? All of those have already been set by the structure, and now you're creating the the things that will further that in a tax efficient manner, in an asset protection manner. We call them various kinds of trusts, whether they're intentionally defective grantor trusts, whether they are charitable lead trusts, whether they are private foundations, whether they are DApps. It comes into that. There are people with hundreds of millions of dollars who never want to do anything other than use DApps. There are reasons for that. It comes back to the structures about how they operate, how they communicate, how they want to do things. There are people with $1 million who need private foundations because of what they want to do with their lives and what they expect their legacy to be. Then the innovation part is where it gets very challenging because this is a part that I would say traditional estate planning has never addressed, which is I always joke and say, why is estate planning always planned with the underlying concept that the client is going to pass away within 24 hours. And the reason is you're not planning for the inevitability of change. One of the common things I hear even this week was that planning was done for a family, second generation in the US, completely US centered, no dual passports, nothing, no dual citizenship, anything. And they fully anticipate that they will remain in this country. They have minor children and they also have minor grandchildren. And the very good planning attorney, very good law firm, and they have fully aligned this family into a domestic planning situation. What happens when that child goes to school abroad? What happens when the grandchild does what I did, which is I immigrated from India and I effectively married a foreigner because my husband is from the South, all American for hundreds of years. So at this point, you're in cross border planning. What happens when traditions don't align? What happens if your philanthropy was religiously inclined and you have multiple religions within the family? You have to plan for flexibility, and planning for flexibility is often lacking in long-term planning. So the innovation part, it's not so much about showing the client here are all the solutions, but it is rather telling them that over time, here are the gaps that exist. And for that, we developed a system that we call it's now the Clexa method because it actually brings the governance and the innovation piece into it. It started out as a Royal method, which is assessment, strategy, and implementation. And the assessment, it goes through who the family or the client is as a whole across every sector, and it does an assessment of where are all the gaps within these three things. And then based on what the client's risk tolerance is and where they actually put their values, we develop a strategy. In a lot of places where every textbook and every academic institution and most concrete planning strategies will tell you that this client must have a trust, otherwise they're going to have a 40% estate tax put on a significant amount of wealth. I've had clients tell me that is fine
Hmm.
because of what their goal actually is. They wanted to have certain flexibility. They anticipated that the next generation was going to invest in certain things, by that would be offset anyway. Maybe it'll happen, maybe it'll not, but the risk belongs to the client, not to the advisor. So they should know what risk they're entering into. So I think as an advisor, our assessment methodology goes through what are their family structures, what are their constraints, what do they believe in, what things do they have in place, what are their technical considerations, what do they know, what do they not know, what do they really care about, what are the things they do. Sometimes you find out that the client is helping entrepreneurs somewhere in Africa for fun, and you suddenly realize that there's a whole philanthropic initiative that could be tax efficient. Now you can present that to those come out to the assessment. So we do assessment strategy, implementation, and implementation strategy, as I explained, is where we go down the paths and develop the most catered strategy for the client. Sometimes it's tax efficient, sometimes it's not. That's also a decision the client has made, right? Because they know what they're entering. And then on the implementation is what you're very familiar with, which is to put the documents into place, whether it
I
is
love
holding
that.
companies, private
I
foundations.
love that. My takeaway here is that strategy comes way, way after the fact, after all these governance and structural issues are assessed and agreed upon. So communication is key at the outset. And only then can a strategy be implemented, created, and implemented. That's fantastic. That's really interesting. And it really puts the work that we do in philanthropy in better context, really, and helps us understand where the clients are. You've created 5 questions that every wealth holder should ask. Are you able to tell me about them? Are you able to tell me about what those questions might be? One, two,
Sure.
three, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think this, unsurprisingly, it goes back to some of the things I just mentioned. The questions have to do with not the well, let's think about ourselves. We don't wake up in the morning and think about how am I going to pay less taxes today.
No, we
That's
don't.
not that's not the human nature. So when you're asking somebody to plan for their own life and what will remain after them, starting out with the assumption that their primary incentive is to reduce taxes. I don't think it makes sense. I mean, maybe they don't realize it, but that doesn't make sense. So we again come back to first thing you ask is what is purpose? I mean, when you ask the person, what is your purpose in wanting to do planning or preservation or create legacy? It sounds very philosophical, but it's actually a very precise question. Because if your purpose is for a lot of first generation wealth, their purpose is to never have the future generation go through the hardship of going from nothing to wealth in, as they did. Don't go down the same journey. So it is protection overall. So that then it becomes okay, I want intergenerational legacy. Now we go to the second tier of purpose, which is, but your kids are born into wealth and they will make more. Your risk of actually them losing it all is much lower than them making more. They're probably going to make a lot more. What is the message you want to give to them? Do you want them to save it all? Do you want them to put it in certain types of things? Do you want them to help people? Do you want them to help animals? Why do you want them to have the money? That's, the why, right? And that sort of gives you a framework, the beginning of the framework of, am I designing for a family that's going to be known as the future philanthropic family, the future publishing family, the future real estate family? That's our identities. This is the definition of identity. For single family offices with multi-generational wealth, until recently, where a lot more opportunities and completely novel types of investments are possible, their family purpose was already set. Seventh generation doesn't agree. So how do we prevent that from occurring? That also comes back to understanding. So you understand the purpose and you understand what the initial initiative is for that person to do wealth planning. Then you look at what you consider your structure, whether it is your wealth is through your various business ownerships, investments, philanthropy, private foundations, uh, maybe very informal schemes, maybe it is very, informal giving or informally mentoring, whatever it is. Does that structure reflect accurately how your wealth will sustain itself? And I don't mean wealth in terms of asset value, wealth as in the entire value of a person and a family legacy, which is what your beliefs are, what your values are, everything else, knowledge, education. Do you want it to be that for for the foreseeable future or future generations, you want education to be a primary aspect? Or is it the opposite, that you want them to have actual skills that they can actually build something? I mean, all of those you can factor into planning. So you're building a structure that's governance structure that doesn't frustrate the purpose over the generations, but rather furthers it. We have I've had clients who are very creative in the fine arts, and they said that the business dies with them because none of the children were interested in the arts. So I went in and said, no, if we get out from the field of law and we go into the business sector and we create a knowledge management system, we can build a system by which your company strives and we can determine intellectual property that can be protected. So, three generations down, when somebody picks up that art gene from you, your enterprise is still there for them to go back and put their value into. But for the next three generations, your kids and grandkids and great grandkids are going to continue to benefit from the wealth that your business has built. And because it'll continue to grow and prosper under the knowledge that you have created, but you have no structure and you have not put it into a scalable framework for it to last. So that became something that was IP protection and legacy. The third part is obviously strategy, which is what are the specific actions and governance models or partnerships that really illuminate your purpose. And one of the things is going back to something I said. Any type of trust means that you have to give up control. It doesn't matter what the rules say or how it is drafted, there is some sense of giving up control. It may be minimal in certain instances. Some people do not want to do that. So is that the right strategy? Some people are willing. So it's the offset, right? So I mean, when I do offshore, it's one of the things that they all automatically say, now it's called NIIT, but what used to be called the guilty tax. Oh, you must avoid guilty at all costs. I would do a computational variation. I said, you can pay guilty of this much, but because of the foreign credit offset, it's actually only this much. So you're paying 6%, but you still get to protect your assets offshore. So you decide, is that worthwhile to you? For some it is, for some it's not. But again, it gives them options. So strategy has to be attuned to the purpose and the structure. And then innovation is where you start looking at what is available to you, what is being presented to you, and what you wish you had, which is, you know, if I, this is where you say that if I could look into a crystal ball, I wish we had a tool that could do this, or I wish my legacy would be defined by somebody who, well, let's take something that's dear to heart here. I would like the future to be where the tool that I have clients who have done AI in healthcare, but not in this specific sector. It would be great that the AI tools and the AI knowledge that we have imparted can one day make it so that cardiac arrest no longer exists. Now we can make a pathway in planning, in private foundation, where what it encompasses is not just the development of technology or supporting entrepreneurs, but maybe it is aligned towards certain healthcare initiatives that go that way, and there are partnerships and sponsorships possible. So we're bringing everything together, and it's about, what is legacy really made of? And legacy is basically ensuring sustainability. Legacy is not about what you do today, but rather the question is, if you just froze in time, whatever it is, whether you passed away or whether you decided to retire or you decided to go somewhere, would your purpose and strategy and structure stay intact? Would that framework and the whole house that you have built, can it continue to last despite you not being there? And that's legacy. So, one of the common things that people say is like, oh, this is all done by the letter of intent that a lot of estate planners sort of advise their clients to do. I go back to take the last 100 years, talk about our own history. What your grandfather or my grandfather would have written about a letter of intent, I'm sure today, sitting in modern America, we would probably be a little bit enraged by the values and the things that they put forward as being what they really considered. So the letter of intent may actually, without a framework like this, the letter of intent standing alone as this is what I want my legacy to be and these are what my values are, third, fourth, fifth, seven generations down, those kids may say that we have absolutely no desire to further the purpose of what they wanted. The truth is, if you actually go and do a deep dive and structure it this way, there might be a situation where they have developed something that, in all seeming ways in today's world, might seem absolutely atrocious or discriminatory or whatever it is, everything that's against what we stand for today. And when you look at why they did it and what they actually believe, not what they believed, but how they implemented it, what their goal was, you find that there's a space even today that it fits into. So that's you can't do that with a simple letter. You have to do it with an entire governance structure. It's like, and that's those five questions, which is, I think, as a purpose, structure, strategy, innovation, and legacy. It's like each of those delving into those.
Priya, this is really, really interesting to me as you help just expand on what legacy really means and how we can build legacy even for the the traditional client. You don't have to be an ultra high net worth client to be concerned about these kinds of things. Legacy is important to all of us as we age, as we grow older, as we think about our place in time, our place on this planet. And so this has been really, really interesting. You said that wealth is fleeting unless it serves something that lasts. And I think that your legacy is bound to be your passion for public service and your passion for helping people understand not only their purpose in life, but how to create a structure and implement a strategy that helps to serve that purpose long term. I want to thank you for joining us today. I think this has been really beneficial. It's really opened my mind and hopefully others' minds to what we're all about in philanthropy and the work that you are doing in your practice and with your consultancy and with your partners there. This is really interesting work, very exciting work, and you're in the best place. I think you're doing the right things right now. So thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. The American Heart Association appreciates your service, your dedication, and the work that you're doing with your clients to help us build a world of healthier lives free from heart disease and stroke. Thank you, Priya.
Thank you very much, Ed. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.